Sikivu Hutchinson is a feminist, novelist, playwright, director, and atheist. She received her doctorate from New York University and is the author of many books, including White Nights, Black Paradise, and that's about the 1978 Jonestown Massacre, Moral Combat, Black Atheists, Gender Politics, and the Values War, and two new books she'll be signing later today, The Rock and Roll Heretic, The Life and Times of Rory Tharp, and Humanists in the Hood, Unapologetically Black, Feminist, and Heretical. Moral Combat is the first book on atheism per se to be published by an African-American woman. Sikivu was named Secular Woman of the Year in 2013 and was a recipient of the Harvard Humanist of the Year Award. Her articles have been published in the Washington Post, Huffington Post, Religion Dispatches, and the LA Times. She founded Black Skeptics Los Angeles in 2010. FFRF, thanks to the FFRF Forward Freethought Fund endowed by one of our members, has been grateful to work with Sikivu and Black Skeptics in their annual scholarships for students who are first in their family to attend college. She's also the founder of the Women's Leadership Project in LA to mentor youth. We're very pleased to bestow FFRF's Freethought Heroine Award on someone who definitely is what renowned Black feminist and atheist Florence Kennedy would call a real kick-ass. Please greet our 2021 Freethought Heroine. Settle.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for the award and the recognition. And I want to begin by uplifting the fact that today is Trans Day of Remembrance and Resilience, and it is an international day of commemoration of all of the trans lives that have been lost to transphobic, trans-antagonistic, sexist, racist, and white supremacist violence, particularly the disproportionate number of African-American trans women as well as men that have perished due to these conditions of apartheid. And I want to underscore that I stand in complete and unapologetic solidarity with our trans families and our trans communities of color that have been deeply and egregiously impacted by this global plague and erasure of their lives. Thanks. I want to say that I passionately believe that it's the task of a free thinker, period, whether or not one is considered to be a hero or a heroine, to afflict the comfortable and to comfort the afflicted. And toward that end, when I first started writing about racism and atheism, and the white supremacist legacies of humanism, and what I will call the Black secular social justice imperative, there were some elite white males in the movement who got royally pissed off. Surprise, surprise. And I was informed back in 2012 that evidently there was a secret memo that had been circulated demanding that I be checked for my heresy. And in response to that, I wrote a piece called The Uppity Negress and the OGs, or the Original Gangsters, because that's what that cabal was acting like. And I'm going to underscore this morning what I have emphasized, again, unapologetically, throughout my checkered tenure as an atheist, that if you are a white person and you are not willing to interrogate your white privilege, your white entitlement, and your investment in legacies of white apartheid and white supremacy, you cannot rightfully claim to be a free thinker. Because let's be clear, you have forged your free thought liberties in stolen indigenous lands, in a nation that was built on chattel slavery and racial capitalism, on the backs of the extinguished and the dispossessed. And this is the baseline ideology of Black secular social justice that is based in the principle that social, racial, and educational justice are forms of reparations. And toward that end, in 2014, I approached the FFRF to support our then nascent First in the Family Black Humanist Scholarship Initiative. And the initiative at that point in time was a local one. We award between 4 to 6 youth annually scholarships. And the impetus for the initiative, in addition to much of the programming that Black Skeptics supports year-round via the Women's Leadership Project program and the Standing for Black Girls Coalition and other programs in South L.A. The impetus was the misogynistic inequities and the misogynoirist inequities, which means anti-Black misogyny, that Black girls were experiencing in K through 12, as well as the massive prison pipelining of youth of color, primarily African American, Indigenous, and Latinx. African American girls, for example, are 6 times more likely to be suspended, expelled, and pushed out of school than are non-Black girls. Black girls are 10 times more likely than white girls to receive discipline referrals. And this entrenches not just the school to prison pipeline, but the sexual abuse to prison pipeline. And so we awarded our first cohort of young people their scholarships in 2013. And this was right around the time when George Zimmerman was acquitted for murdering, for lynching Trayvon Martin. And so here we are, 8 years later, in the aftermath of yet another atrocity of a verdict, acquitting a white supremacist vigilante terrorist named Kyle Rittenhouse, history repeating itself. We focused on, with this scholarship initiative, undocumented LGBTQI, foster care, and unhoused youth, and later on secular youth, because that prior group of youth are more likely to be pushed out of school, are more likely to be pipelined into prisons, and are less likely to have the full-bore social, emotional, and academic support that they need to succeed in college, to go to college and graduate from college. And if we look at, for example, the majority of people of color who are imprisoned in California institutions, a good number of them are coming from the foster care system, our former foster youth. If we look at the majority of the juvenile incarcerated population in the United States, the majority of those young people are African American, whereby African American youth only comprise about 13% of the youth population in the United States. And so this atrocity in an exceptionalist nation informs the lives of African American youth across the spectrum. Doesn't matter whether or not they are straight up Pentecostalists or unapologetic atheists. This lack of access to college prep, the lack of access to college counselors, the lack of access to mental health support, the lack of access to culturally responsive education that's based on the lived experiences, the social capital, and the cultural knowledge of communities of color, the lack of access to restorative justice that is based upon the principle of relationship building and conflict mediation and conflict resolution rather than endless policing and surveillance and disruption of the academic lives of our youth. All of these factors inform the apartheid regime of K through 12 in this nation, a regime that certainly has been exacerbated by the hierarchies of the pandemic. And so in 2016, I wrote a piece for the Humanist Magazine where I profiled some of our outstanding winners from that year. Most of these youth were coming from South L.A. high schools. One that I really want to highlight, in addition to Mario, who just graduated from UC Berkeley last year, from King Drew, medical magnet, adjacent to Compton. And Dr. Miani Giron just received her medical degree earlier this year. She's a former foster youth. She was my mentee from 9th grade. She identifies as an agnostic. Graduated from UCLA Medical School and is now a resident at the VA hospital in West LA in psychiatry. So these were some of the youth that were amplified in that article, in which I say, Black youth who reject organized religion don't have the social and economic benefits of white privilege to blunt their apostasy. When they graduate high school, they must navigate institutional racism in historically white-dominated colleges and universities where they may never have a professor or dean who looks like them. And similarly, one of our 2021 winners, Belen Padilla, is a young woman who is now attending Scripps College, and she had these insights about the award that she received.
Hello, I am Belen Padilla, and as a queer Latina atheist, the scholarship has provided me the empowerment by valuing my voice, and with that empowerment and the financial support granted by the scholarship, I will continue and expand my nonprofit work that raises awareness of health disparities through science and statistics rather than faith, especially coming from a Latinx community in Las Vegas, Nevada, where 90% of my school was reported to be Hispanic and Black. And in Hispanic communities tend to be highly religious. I have always been open about my lack of faith, and I have always been shamed and belittled by my own community, family, and occasionally my own friends. But Black Skeptics has made me feel that my choice is valid and has empowered me. With this scholarship, it will ease some of the financial stress off my shoulders to further my neuroscience education at Scripps College, where I will later pursue medical school to become a neurologist to join the 6% of active Latinx identifying physicians and the 2% of Latinos with STEM degrees, and even lower percentage of low-income first-generation queer Latinas in STEM.
Okay. And I want to make a note that Belen is a recipient of, it's the first in the family Black Skeptic Scholarship in partnership with FFRF, and it's designated the Forward Freethought Scholarship. And the next excerpt
Hello,
is
I am Belen.
Kaylin Nelson. She is one of this year's recipients going to the University of Central Florida, and she has some really telling insights about mental health, which I'll amplify later on in the talk.
Hi, my name is Kaylin Nelson, and I am one of the winners of the First in the Family Humanist Scholarship. Firstly, I'd like to thank Black Skeptics for awarding me this scholarship. In the next few weeks, I will be attending the University of Central Florida, where I will be majoring in social work. Although I'm not completely sure where this path will take me, my dream career is that of a counselor or a therapist. As someone who was raised in a religious family but does not necessarily subscribe to the same beliefs as my family, making me a secular youth, I understand how important mental health services can be for people like me. Often, our families do not understand this divergence in thoughts or beliefs. We are seen as rebels or deviants simply for not believing. From my personal experience, I know that this can be extremely alienating. Personally, when I have struggled with mental health issues in the past or been caught in difficult situations, the only answer that I've ever been given was prayer. Now, I respect all religions, of course, but prayer sometimes felt impossible or useless when I was in those situations. At times like those, I would have benefited greatly from having someone who was unbiased or non-religious to listen to me and to provide me with guidance. Hi, my name is Kaylin Nelson.
Okay, thanks. So Kaylin also participated in a panel that we convened earlier this month in collaboration with the American Humanist Association, the Black Humanist Alliance, and Black Skeptics. And the subject of that panel was whether or not secular humanism is relevant to Black Gen Z youth, particularly given the escalation of anti-Blackness in K through 12 and higher education, as well as the radical right backlash, the racist backlash against critical race theory and social justice education. And so the consensus was decidedly ambivalent to negative, because quite frankly, when we break it down, white-dominated secular organizations have not stepped up for the racial, social, and educational justice issues that are burning in communities of color. And this is to their peril, given the fact that we are on the precipice of a major transition in demographics in the US to majority-minority in 2045, and that greater numbers of African American, Latinx, Indigenous, and other BIPOC youth are identifying as queer, identifying as gender nonconforming and non-binary and gender fluid. And so, despite these disruptions, these radical disruptions and shifts, we continue to see pervading the internet these kinds of sentiments, reactionary white-splaining sentiments like this article, "Atheists Don't Owe Your Social Justice Agenda a Damn Thing." And so this was a piece that was written in direct response to my 2014 Washington Post article entitled, "Atheism Has a Big Race Problem That No One Is Talking About," wherein I take on and challenge the exclusive church-state separation focus of organizations like FFRF and American Humanists and American Atheists and SSA and CFI. And yes, since then, there have been gains, there have been improvements, there have been allyship initiatives, some might say performative allyship. And we certainly do appreciate the support of FFRF and other organizations for our major conference that we've convened for the past couple of years, the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference, the first and only of its kind nationwide, that is supported, that is appreciated. But let's break it down. White folks cannot sleep on these dynamics. You absolutely cannot sleep. And in that Washington Post piece, and in other critiques that I've made, I've also broken down the problematic dynamic of white-dominated secular boards and white-dominated secular conferences and white-dominated secular decision-making processes and white-dominated leadership, epitomized globally by the anti-social justice dude bro mentality of Richard Dawkins, who in my mind is exhibit A for why so many BIPOC folk have been repelled from new atheism and organized secularism, who seems to have a platform that is an endless font of Islamophobic, ethnocentric, sexist, anti-Black, and of course anti-trans screeds and diatribes that are consistently co-signed within organized atheism and organized secularism and organized free thought. So if you are a Black woman dealing with microaggressions and bigotry and gaslighting and discrimination in the workplace, in your school, or in your neighborhood, why in hell would you want to wade into the shit show that is organized free thought, atheism, or secularism? Because let's break it down. In the aftermath of the lynching of George Floyd, when we had all of this corporate posturing about supporting BLM and about rushing in to institute diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives to supposedly redress racial disparities in the workplace. When the dust has settled, Black women are still on the bottom of the wage scale, next to Latinx women. Black women essential workers have been displaced in disproportionate numbers from the workplace to caregive for elderly relatives, as well as children that have been displaced due to the hierarchies and the inequities of the pandemic. Black women are least likely to have unionized job protections and earn living wages and have the benefit of defined benefit plans. And this is also within the context of the disproportionalities experienced by Black queer women in a nation where we are still waiting with bated breath for the Senate to weigh in on the Equality Act. This is also situated within the context of what has been dubbed a pandemic within a pandemic of domestic violence and sexual violence. And here are some of the stats on the disproportionate outcomes for domestic violence survivors. African American women are disproportionately impacted by sexual violence and domestic violence, such that nearly 60% of Black girls will experience sexual abuse by the age of 18, and only 1 in 15 African American women feel empowered to report rape or sexual abuse. And so this question of the hashtag #MeToo movement intersecting with the Say Her Name movement, which is designed to amplify the erasure of Black women within narratives of state violence and mobilization around state violence, is particularly acute for Black girls because in many regards, despite the fact that the hashtag #MeToo movement was spearheaded by a powerful visionary Black feminist named Tarana Burke. Who's heard of Tarana Burke in this audience, by the way? Okay, good. Just checking. Despite the fact that Tarana Burke and other Black feminists have been on point with making the lives of Black women and girls visible in the hashtag #MeToo movement, it effectively has been hijacked within popular culture by white women who have made it into a platform for their grievances, thus erasing the institutional and community disparities that African American women and girls confront at the intersections of being considered to be adultified, which is a term that was coined by a Georgetown University researcher to really highlight how Black girls are criminalized, viewed as more mature, as more adult, as less worthy of protection, as less innocent vis-a-vis white girls. And this is particularly insidious when we consider the Christian policing of respectability politics that are imposed upon African American girls and Black women. This insidiousness was really driven home to me years ago in one South L.A. high school when I was in conversation with one of my mentees. And she talked about being handcuffed and led away by police, school police, when she was watching a fight. So she wasn't even involved in the fight. She was just on the outskirts watching, yet got handcuffed. And so she commented that had she been a white girl, she would have gotten Starbucks and some Uggs. And I remember thinking that this analysis was brilliant and bittersweet because her statement, again, is indicative of this nexus of criminalization and misogynoir, anti-Black misogyny, and the adultification of Black girls vis-a-vis white girls. And in many ways, it captures the rage that we experience when, for example, we see on national TV yet another missing white girl fetishized as the life that we need to absolutely be riveted on, as the life that we need to pay attention to, amplify, and validate at all costs. Raise your hand if you know who Gabby Petito is and you don't know who Mitrice Richardson is, a Black woman who went missing after foul play at one of the LA County Sheriff's substations in 2009. And the not so fun fact is that African American young women comprise a good majority of those who are missing and abducted in the United States, but you wouldn't know it if you turned on CNN or Fox or MSNBC ad nauseum, ad infinitum. Black women, again, are invisible when it comes to mainstream narratives about who is impacted by state violence. And last year's uprising in protest of the police murder of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky, really marked the first time that a Black woman victim received global attention. Her young life was savagely cut short because of the terroristic reign of police in Black neighborhoods, and certainly white Christians will never have to know this horror, and white secularists will never have to know this horror, because your free thought liberties are forged on this erasure of the enormity and the toxicity of white supremacy. I have 3 more minutes, and I'm just going to close with reference to, fast-forwarding through some of this material, our Standing for Black Girls Coalition, which we convened earlier this year on the heels of the first ever rally to amplify Black women and girl sexual violence and rape survivors, the first ever rally in South L.A. And so the coalition is comprised of high school students from the Women's Leadership Project, alum from the Women's Leadership Project, in partnership with Black women educators and organizers in LA County, as well as policymakers. And we have a number of initiatives that I'm not going to be able to go into here that we put into place and that we're actually moving forward, partnerships with Planned Parenthood LA, with the Department of Public Health, with the Office of Supervisor Holly Mitchell. And I'm just going to show, we got 2 minutes, a clip of the rally. this year's rally.
We're standing. We're standing. We're standing. We're standing. I said we're standing. We're standing. For black girls. For black girls. For black girls. For black girls.
This is a community event to be able to help raise awareness and end rape culture and violence against black women. As you guys know, there are countless stories, countless women unnamed that are not being heard. Their voices are not being heard in terms of justice. So we are here today to take action, to stand with our community, to continue to come out and show support.
We've effectively been told to sit down, shut up, remain silent, remain invisible, remain respectable, and to self-sacrifice for everybody under the damn sun except for ourselves.
But if we don't stand up for ourselves, who will? We have to set the examples for these young women to understand this is what agency looks like. This is how you stand in your space and who you are and demand better for yourself, demand that we stand with you, demand to be seen, and demand to be protected. Until I'm clear about my role as a policymaker, as an elected official who is honored to be elected by those of you who live in the 2nd District.
Today we see your beauty. We see your value, your worthiness, your girlhood, your innocence, your resilience, your strength, your vibrancy, your power, your courage. In a world where you are not a priority, we prioritize you.
What we need to do to move forward when we talk about progress, when it comes to revolution, the first thing you need to know is acknowledge me, because we cannot have any sort of change if you don't acknowledge a problem. And we got a problem. We got hundreds of years of a problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, we are here for a purpose. We are here standing for black girls. This is our 2nd annual event. Women's Leadership Program. You guys give a round of applause to these students who helped to put this event together. I also want to say thank you to all of our vendors.
But in the final analysis, radical progressive black folks know that we're still bound by these legacies of apartheid in this nation, and that our humanist free thought agenda is the same as an anti-racist, anti-imperialist social justice agenda, where, to quote the great freethinker Frederick Douglass, power, especially in light of the white lies of the American dream and the American empire, concedes nothing without demand. Thank you.